Over the past few weeks, we have learned more and more about the president's pick for the Federal Reserve, Stephen Moore. We know he's made all kinds of offensive, disparaging comments about women, even about women playing sports. He's even questioned women in broadcasting booths, in the broadcast booths. We know he is against child labor laws. He thinks, these are quotes, he thinks we should have 11-year-olds working. He said, I want people to start working at 11, at 12. He said, I am a radical in this. Think about this. The president is about to nominate for the Federal Reserve a gentleman who says he's an economist, but really isn't. He didn't get his degree, and didn't get a PhD in economics, as Federal Reserve people often do, but put that aside. But he says, I'm a radical on child labor. I mean, who thinks that way in the year 2019? He was banned, other things we know, he was banned from the op-ed page of the Kansas City Star after publishing an editorial with all kinds of factual errors. The editor knew he was a conservative. The editor may have been a conservative, I don't know, that's not the point. The point is, it was filled with factual errors, and the editor said, that kind of factual errors, those kinds of factual errors are just unacceptable. We are finished with them. So she said, not that she doesn't agree with certain viewpoints, the editor, but just said, we're not running him anymore because he doesn't tell the truth. We have him in videotape showing breathtaking contempt for people in the middle of the country, from places like Arkansas and Kentucky and Tennessee and my state of Ohio. Here's what Mr. Moore said. If you want to, and this is on tape and many people have seen, if you want to live in the Midwest, where else do you want to live besides Chicago? You don't want to live in Cincinnati, the home of Senator Portman, or Cleveland, my home. He said, you don't want to live in Cincinnati or Cleveland, or these armpits of America. That's what he said. President Trump is showing his disregard for Cincinnati and Cleveland and Kentucky and Arkansas and Tennessee and the middle of the country by nominating someone that's so out of touch and has such contempt for the middle of this country. The armpits of America, that's what he called two of my state's great cities. Make no mistake, he wasn't just insulting Cleveland and Cincinnati. He was insulting Little Rock. He was insulting Nashville. He was insulting people that get up every day and work hard. He was dismissing millions of Americans. He was undermining the dignity of work by dismissing them, people who have been ignored by Washington and been preyed on by Wall Street. Across the industrial heartland, tens of millions of Americans raise families. They serve in our military. They power our companies. They contribute to our country. Mr. Moore, how dare you demean them and diminish them with those kinds of comments? How dare you insult them in their hometowns? You can't fight for these Americans when you don't know the first thing about the places they live. You don't understand that all work has dignity. You don't understand the dignity of work. You don't understand honoring and respecting work. It's particularly ironic where Mr. Moore made these comments. He made these comments. He was speaking at an event sponsored by a think tank called the Heartland Institute, located, I believe, in Chicago. Can you believe that? Take a look at who's really behind this group, the Heartland Group. I mean, people can name themselves whatever they want. They call themselves the Heartland Institute, but they're funded by ExxonMobil, biggest oil company, I believe, in the world. They're funded by Philip Morris, one of the tobacco giants, big tobacco, that poisons our children. 480,000 people die every year from tobacco in this country. 480,000 people. You know what that means? It means Philip Morris has got to find 1,300 new customers every day just to make up for the people that tobacco has killed. So the Heartland Institute is funded by ExxonMobil, it's funded by Philip Morris, it's funded by the Koch brothers, or at least we used to know they were funded by these groups. Today, unfortunately, Mr. President, they don't disclose who their individual donors are, which is pretty shocking. They didn't want people, the Heartland Institute didn't want people in the actual heartland to realize they're nothing but a corporate front, a corporate special interest funded front. And what have they done with those donations? Well, you can expect them to do the bidding of ExxonMobil. You can expect them to do the bidding of Philip Morris. You can expect them to do the bidding of the Koch brothers, and they certainly got their money's worth, those interest groups. The Heartland Institute's pushed junk science on behalf of tobacco companies to try to block and stop and neuter anti-smoking public health laws. As recently as in the late 1990s, their president wrote an op-ed. I mean, this isn't really funny at all. I don't know why I laugh, but it's so ridiculous. President of that group wrote an op-ed claiming that moderate smoking doesn't raise your risk of lung cancer. You know, getting those 15-year-olds to start smoking only a little bit, I guess that's okay because that doesn't increase their chance of lung cancer. That's their notable achievement. So, of course, we shouldn't be surprised that the men in the room, and it was almost all men, you could tell from the video and the audio, that the men in the room when Mr. Moore talked about my city, Cleveland, Senator Portman's city, Cincinnati, talked about them being armpits of the nation, the men in the room howled with laughter. Because look who comes to the Heartland Institute. It's a bunch of lobbyists, a bunch of drug company people, a bunch of oil company men, a bunch of tobacco men, a bunch of gun lobby people, all these people that come to the Heartland Institute. Of course they were laughing at those people in the industrial Midwest, in Cleveland, in Mansfield, in Toledo, in Zanesville, in all over our country. That's what these phony right-wing tobacco-funded think tanks really think of America's heartland. President Trump likes to pretend he cares about people in places like Cincinnati and Cleveland. He likes to make big promises to the people in the heartland, but look who he puts in charge. These conservative elites, and make no mistake, they are far-right conservatives and they are elites. They all think they're better than the rest of the country. These conservative elites, whether they're on Wall Street, whether they're in Trump Tower, whether they're at the White House, where the White House looks like a retreat for Wall Street executives, whether these conservative elites are going in and out of the office doors of the Senate Majority Leader with their requests for tax cuts in hand, these are people that have contempt for the people they're supposed to serve. Stephen Moore says he doesn't want to be judged on all the extreme and offensive articles he's written. He wants to be judged by his economic record. So let's do that. Let's look at his economic record. It's just as bad. It's in line with views of all these right-wing elites. It stems directly from contempt for ordinary people. You see it in their policies. Make it easier for Wall Street to pay these huge $1 million, $2 million, $5 million, $10 million bonuses that Wall Street elites get, so often the expense of workers. I was at my high school reunion in Mansfield, Ohio, some time ago. I sat across the table from a woman who had worked at one of America's largest banks. When I grew up, and I used to put my family farm paycheck into this bank. It was called Farmers Bank in those days. It's been bought and sold and bought by other bigger banks. But the point is, she had worked as a teller in this bank for 30 years. She was making $30,000 a year, yet Wall Street continues giving million-dollar bonuses. Massive tax cuts for corporations, for billionaires, pennies for working families. Look what happened in Kansas, where Stephen Moore was banned from writing in the newspaper because he lied so much. He helped design the tax cut boondoggle that bankrupted the state. It was the plan that eliminated taxes entirely for LLCs and pass-through corporations. Who paid the price? People who paid the price were millions of ordinary Kansans. There was no money for teachers. There was no money for health care. There was no money for higher ed. When Republicans in the state finally rebelled and repealed that Stephen Moore far-right tax plan, Kansas had fallen behind the rest of the country. They were actually losing jobs in Kansas, a once prosperous state, while almost every other state was adding them. One advocate in Kansas who saw his work up close said, "I wouldn't let Stephen Moore within 100 yards of my enemy's piggy bank, let alone put him on the Federal Reserve." So why on earth, Mr. President, why on earth would we want to hire that guy to help run our national economy? It's pretty clear that creating jobs for workers in the heartland doesn't really matter to Stephen Moore and his crowd. After all, they don't even want to set foot there. It comes back to the dignity of work. We need people in office who understand, who respect work. Whether you punch a clock or swipe a badge, whether you work on a salary, whether you work for tips, whether you're raising children, whether you're taking care of an aging parent, it comes down to honoring and respecting work, something apparently Stephen Moore and his far-right elitist crowd know nothing about. The last thing we need is another conservative elitist looking down his nose at American workers, at Ohio workers, in workers in Arkansas, in workers all across this country.